So, Bear's Restaurant. It's an iOS game made for phones by the company Daigo. They've made a lot of other titles before. Of course, they're a Japanese-based company. So, yeah, let's get started. So, the plot of Bear's Restaurant is it stars these two little animals. One's a cat, one's a bear. Other than that, really not a whole lot into their characters in the beginning. So you play as the cat. She doesn't really have a canon name, according to the creator so far. It's just Cat and Mr. Bear. So they work at what seems to be a restaurant catering to the humans and animals. Basically, the people's last meals, sort of like in a prison where people get their last meal, but they get their last meal before they pass on to heaven or hell. So basically, the whole plot is just kind of an explanation of where people go after they pass on. Will they... But either way, they get to come in and get something to eat before they pass on. It can be something small, but usually it's something that means a lot to the person before they had passed away. But as the plot goes on, the small black-eyed creature appears, and we don't really know about it in the beginning, but it comes into play more along in the other parts of the game. So basically, later on, you discover that the cat has the ability to dive into the deceased memories. Doing so allows you to figure out what some of these characters need as far as what they want for their last meal. Like if they can't communicate, or they are kind of hard to understand, or they aren't going to tell you because, people are stubborn. Some people are stubborn. Some people are kind of an easy read. It's all about the human condition, I guess. But basically, only this cat has the ability to do this. So it led me to kind of think, how does this cat do this? Does it touch the people on the head, but it kind of creates a memory. It shows a childhood memory of where they came to love the dish that they do and where they come from as far as their history goes. But I think that this is a really cool mechanic because it gives more insight to characters we only see for a brief period of time. But it just gives them more life and more depth to their character. Really, it's a really good part of the game. For the small amount of time you're in Bear's Restaurant, you really get to know these deceased people's goals, their dreams, what they like, what they don't like. It's really good in storytelling with this aspect. So it led me to believe, and this is an artist rendition, how does Cat dive? Anyway, so basically, as the plot goes along, you find more and more people coming into Bear's Restaurant to get their last meal. But the more you go on, you find out how these people die. It's completely optional if you want to look at this. In the paid version, in the sponsored version, you can see all of these cutscenes without any ads. But unfortunately, if you're just playing the free version, you get to kind of slog through some ads. But it's totally worth it. You get to see so much more about these characters that, you meet for a short time. How they died, where they're from, and some of them are very, like shocking and sad. So if you are like triggered by this kind of talk of death and dying, then maybe this isn't the game for you, but I highly recommend it anyway. It doesn't go into gory detail, but it can be a little bit shocking for people. So doing so leads you to understand more about the characters, and Kat is the only one who can do this, but later on, if you have the paid version, or if you're crazy and get the 5,000 fish from the cat, you also know that Mr. Bear has this ability too. However, in the main campaign of the game, it isn't really alluded to that he has this ability. So basically, later on in the game, you find out more about Mr. Bear and Cat, two characters that really, in the beginning, don't have a lot of personality, other than, well, Mr. Bear. He's got a lot of personality, like a gruff, kind of old man character. But spoilers start here, so be warned. I'm just going to go into kind of the later game aspects of Bear's Restaurant. So basically, later on in the game, you find out and you dive into Mr. Bear's memories, and you kind of learn about who he was. It turns out Cat and Mr. Bear are somehow related, and they've both passed on as well. However, in this purgatory-like state, they're tasked with giving those who haven't moved on yet something to eat before they move on to heaven or hell. So basically, we learn by diving into Mr. Bear's memories that he, in fact, is not actually really a bear. He was turned into a bear because of people's cognition of him in his past life. Mr. Bear is actually a human man, just a really scruffy, buff kind of human man. And we discover that Cat was actually his daughter, but he doesn't know right away. Cat being his daughter. She's wordless. She doesn't remember until later on in sort of the epilogue part of the paid version of the game, where Mr. Bear goes into hell. He, for some reason, Cat wanders off and is taken to sort of nility, which is basically in the depths of hell, where no one can really be redeemed. They've either done something extremely wrong, or they're just not being redeemed. And for some reason, Cat ends up in that deep, dark part of hell. So it's up to Mr. Bear to go back down and save his daughter from basically the unreachable aspect of hell. So while you're in this part, you play as Mr. Bear. He is definitely a lot sassier than the wordless Cat. He often has a few quips here and there about who he's talking to at the time. Basically, to progress along this part of the game, you talk with people who are going down into hell. Like, they've committed crimes against humanity, they've become thieves, they've manipulated, basically anything that, you know, is wrong in the biblical sense. A lot of the allegory in this game comes kind of from the sins of heaven and hell, and sort of the Christian viewpoints of these ideals. But really, if you really enjoy this kind of symbolism in a game, it's a really good pick up and play. It's a lot for an iOS game. I could really see this game being ported onto, for example, Steam or the Switch, or like as kind of like a one-off, almost virtual console type game. It's got a lot of beautiful pixel art, and the music by Zion is just amazing. It's such a treat. And earlier on in the video, you got to hear a handful of the tracks. Basically, this game would be better suited, I feel, as like a standalone Steam release where you pay one fee and you get the soundtrack, maybe even some concept art, but I think it's well worth the price to experience without ads because they do kind of break the game's immersion. It's really, I highly recommend picking this up, even just if you're doing kind of like you're in a rainy day at home or you're at work and need to kill time. It's just such a great story, and I feel that it deserves more justice other than just being like kind of an iOS game. I really do think that it deserves a bigger release. It's got a lot of aspects that remind me of kind of the indie RPG horror. It's got a lot of aspects of games like Undertale, where it breaks the fourth wall and has a lot of endearing characters. I think probably the only negatives I have about the game is that, yes, Daigo is a Japanese company. Some of the grammar is a little bit off, but really it's a pretty well done considering. I also think that there are a little too many ads, especially if you're playing the free version of the game. I ended up paying about $14 to unlock the entirety of the game. I think that's where the Steam release would be best suited, because then all of this narrative would be unlocked right away and you could just play through without the hindrance of ads or, kind of having the other games of Daigo thrust upon you. Even though they're great games, I think that on its own merit, it would be a better game if it just was a standalone game, no ads for other Daigo properties, no ads for, iOS games. I think this game really does have a lot of potential in that regard. However, it would also benefit from being a little bit longer. Maybe have a few more customers in the restaurant. Maybe have a few more people on the way to hell. Maybe expand upon what you can do. Maybe have a little bit of extra aspects to like lengthen the game or kind of add to the narrative. Because really, Bear's Restaurant isn't a long game. It took me about 2 to 3 hours to complete all the game and see all the memory shards and finish the entire narrative. So really, it's not a long game. I think if it were to be released on an actual platform other than iOS store, it would require a lot more content to be really worth that $14 that I ended up paying for it. But really, Daigo did a really good job compared to his other work, or their other work rather. It's definitely has improved upon versus, like, for example, Bluebird of Happiness. If you're really interested in Bear's Restaurant, there is some good news. There has been a recently released sort of spiritual sequel to this game, which I've of course been playing, and it's got a completely different genre. It's more of a fishing game, but you get to see all the characters you got to know and love in Bear's Restaurant, and you get to talk with them. Like, I even got to see the main character of Bear's Restaurant as soon as I pop open the game, and it's just like seeing an old friend again. And you get to, and it's like a more chill game. Like, you go fishing and you collect fish, but the narrative is still just really, really immersive, especially for an iOS game where you don't usually get that immersion. Like, it's just a great experience, and honestly, don't write it off because it's an iOS game. Like, I would put it on par with even some of the early RPGs you would see on an NES or Super Nintendo. It's just got a lot of meat to it, but I think it would be best suited if it were expanded upon in a full-scale release. Especially, it just gives me that reminder of Undertale or One Shot. It's just such a great immersive experience, but it's kind of hindered by those ads. But, if you're cheap or don't exactly have the funds to buy the full version of the game, there are outs. You have to give the cat 5,000 fish. And in the end game of the full game, you can give the cat 1,000 fish. Even just giving the cat 1,000 fish was so long, but hey, at least you get something cool for your room if you do that. Then also, if you become a sponsor, you get your name in the credits, which, I mean, I'll point out to you at the end of the video here, but I think small companies like Daigo, I think, you know, they deserve that money for the narrative they create alone. It's just such a immersive story for the 3 hours that you spend there. Like, I was humming the music, I was drawing fan art of the characters. I just had a really, really good time in Bear's Restaurant. I highly recommend you pick it up for yourself and give it a try. Yeah, and this is Curlithin with the review of Bear's Restaurant. Hopefully you enjoyed this format. It's kind of more of a conversation than a formal review piece, but I just had a really great time with this game.